The movie begins at the North Pole as Santa's elves are busy making toys. Suddenly, they're attacked by a group of heavily armed men, causing an all-out battle. Shortly after, it's revealed that this is just a promotional video for a Christmas film, which is being produced by a high-ranking executive named Frank Cross. We learn Frank is pushing the company to broadcast an excessive live production of the holiday classic Scrooge on Christmas Eve, making his staff work through the night and away from their families. Next, we see one employee speaking up about the dangers of airing Cross's slightly more traumatic commercial, which promptly leads to the executive Elliot Loudermilk being fired on the spot. Elliot consoles himself out front of the IBC building while Frank watches eagerly through a telescope. His assistant Grace helps him straighten up as his boss, Mr. Preston, makes his way down to his office. For once, we see Frank doing some unprecedented butt-kissing to the one man he can't just fire, ensuring Preston that this $40 million special will own Christmas. A man recognizes Frank and introduces himself as Bryce Cummings. He is, to Frank's dismay, overtly kind and touchy, leading Frank to sprint through the office and back to Grace, demanding a full report on him. She tells him she's already on her way out to take her son to a doctor's appointment, and in a screaming response, Frank informs her that he does not care. Frank returns to find his brother James, where they discuss Frank's love for Christmas. It's cold, and people will stay home and watch television. He repeatedly declines an annual invitation to Christmas Eve family dinner and proceeds to steal an old woman's taxi. While Frank accepts an award and reflects on his sense of compassion and giving, Elliot drinks away his sorrows on the streets of New York, or at least attempts to. Meanwhile, Grace comforts her son after a useless doctor's appointment, revealing that he hasn't spoken a word in 5 years. Back in his office, Frank is greeted by multiple knocks at his door, only for there to be no one on the other side. Confused, Frank locks his door, but it's too late. The entire office starts shaking and knocks turn to destructive banging on his door. Frank arms himself as the door explodes, where a cloud of smoke dissipates to reveal a man who looks like he's come straight from a crypt. The man greets him knowingly, while Frank fires futile shots at him, poking nothing but holes in his body. It's clear this man is nothing of the human sort, as a rat briefly emerges out of the back of his head. Frank realizes the man is Lou Hayward, his old boss and best friend who died 8 years ago. Lou warns Frank that he's in big trouble and that if he doesn't change his ways, he's going to end up doomed just like him. Though Frank assures himself that this is solely the hallucination of Russian vodka talking, Lou cautions that he'll be visited by 3 ghosts tomorrow. Holding him by his throat and gliding him through a closed window, Frank plummets to what should be his death, but instead lands comfortably in a chair, with an incoming voicemail from his long-lost love, Claire. He tells her that he needs to talk to her urgently, and to call him back ASAP. At her home, Grace is concerned about money with her mother and eldest daughter, and sees 3 of her children decorating her youngest like a Christmas tree, telling her children that they can get a real tree when they're free. Meanwhile, Frank is delighted to hear that his frightening ad literally scared a woman to death last night. But publicity this good couldn't be bought. Usual turmoil is at play on the set, with executives unhappy with the amount of skin shown through the outfits. Amidst the chaos calls the delicate voice of Claire, whose angelic face brings an unprecedented smile to Frank's face. They gawk at each other after years of separation until Frank is quickly returned to his greedy executive self, screaming at Grace's mute 6-year-old. Claire reveals that she never married and remained on her own, just like Frank. He blames his irrational phone call from last night on some bad clams and leaves. At a high-end dinner with his boss, Preston, who reveals that he's hired the friendly man from the elevator to work with him, Frank screams at a floating eyeball in his drink and a server seemingly on fire in the back, both clearly non-existent to his fellow coworkers. After dumping a bucket of water at the waiter, Frank smoothly exits the restaurant and hails a cab, where he's greeted by his rampant ghost of Christmas past. The ghost locks the door and drives outrageously around the city, as the meter at the front quickly drops from 1988 to 1955, and they arrive on the street of Frank's childhood. Frank tells the ghost that he gets it. He's trying to flaunt his mother and father and ignite an emotional reaction, but too bad, it's never gonna happen. The 2 enter Frank's childhood home, his mother lying pregnant on the couch and 4-year-old Frank eagerly flicking through the TV. His father enters and hands Frank his Christmas present, which he expects to be a choo-choo train, and is disappointed to find out that it's instead 5 pounds of veal. His father scolds Frank for thinking that life will be handed to him on a silver platter, and baby Frank shares an intimate moment with his mother. Meanwhile, present-day Frank begins to cry at the scene, which he will soon blame on the touching gift from his father, a piece of meat worth $50 in today's marketplace. The 2 speed ahead 13 years to 1968, to Frank's office Christmas party. Frank is too busy at work to enjoy the party until quite literally bumping into Claire at their first encounter. Frank watches reminiscently from the taxi, laughing at their youthfulness. The taxi speeds forward to 1969, to Frank and Claire opening presents in their living room. They read through Lumpy's present and laugh playfully together as present-day Frank grins from the car, a smile only revealed in her presence. In 1971, Frank is invited by his boss to dinner, and Claire reminds him that they already have plans. Their disagreement leads Claire to suggest that they separate for a while, and present-day Frank watches regretfully from the side. The ghost leaves and Frank finds himself back on set, once again berating his staff. Frank enters a homeless shelter distressed about Claire, attempting to track down an address that she gave him. She finds him wrapped in a blanket, mistaken for a homeless man. She tells him that the great thing about regret is that it's never too late to change, and Frank suggests taking her someplace special. But the two are interrupted by a pair of distressed volunteers, and Frank's remaining ill temper manifests as he screams at the women to do their jobs. The two once again disagree, and Frank storms out. Back on set, the lights go out, and Frank is greeted by a deceivingly peaceful fairy, the ghost of Christmas Present. She adorably flies towards him before aggressively punching him downstairs, the first of her many aggressions because, as she says, sometimes the truth is painful. He's punched into the backyard of his assistant Grace's mother's backyard. Here the ghost tells him her son hasn't spoken since he saw his father killed 5 years ago. He expresses that he didn't know Grace's husband had died, though he did recall her wearing black for a year, but he presumed it was a mere fashion statement. He sees how happy the family is, laughing and wrestling each other on the floor, but the ghost scolds him for how poor they are, that surely Grace is due for a raise. The two land in his brother James's house at the annual family Christmas party. James tells his family that he'll never stop inviting his brother to dinner even though he never comes because he's family. Frank becomes emotional and begins to join in on family trivia, attempting to name the boat that took them all to Gilligan's Island. It appears Frank actually wants to be there. Next, Frank lands in what seems to be an underground sewer, surrounded by icicles and snow. He finds Herman, a man from the homeless shelter whom he denied $1, frozen solid next to him. He then once again finds himself on the set, in a manic state, and expresses his first inkling of regret for his Christmas Eve show. The program begins and Frank pours himself a drink in his office. He opens a present from his brother James, a framed picture of the two as children. Written on top is a message. To Frank, the best brother I ever had. Merry Christmas. Suddenly the ghost of Christmas future emerges, only to be scared off by a drunk, frantic Elliot, shotgun in hand. He follows him around the room firing shots, telling him that this is what he deserves for firing him the day before Christmas. Frank manages to escape in the elevator, greeted again by the third ghost. The elevator shakes and opens to some sort of insane psychiatric hospital where Grace visits her mentally unstable son. He then sees the love of his life, Claire, rich and spoiled harshly, turning away 3 begging children. She explains that once a wise friend told her, if you want to save somebody, save yourself. Frank watches shamefully from the side. The elevator drops to a basement where James's wife stands mournfully in front of a coffin. At first, Frank believes it to be James who has died, but after he joins his wife, Frank realizes who it is. The coffin reads Francis Xavier Cross and is pushed into a pit of burning flames. Suddenly, he's inside the coffin, screaming and banging to get out. His legs catch fire and his entire body starts to burn. He then lands back in the office, screaming praise that he is, in fact, alive. He greets Elliot, holding a shotgun to his mouth, with a kiss on the lips and gives him a raspberry to the stomach. He promises to rehire him with twice his original salary, make him his vice president in charge of programming, and even offering him his very own office. He throws Elliot in the elevator and begins to spread his newfound passion for life down in the live Christmas Eve show. While Elliot holds producers at gunpoint upstairs, Frank begins to condemn the program he scheduled, walking in front of the camera and hijacking the show. He showcases his adorable brother James, and his family watches in awe from their living room. He tells James that he was right about everything, except for one thing, that the ship that brought them all to Gilligan's Island was the SS Minnow. The family are bewildered from their couch. Frank continues his streak of reconciliation, asking viewers to call the people they love, that it's not too late. Finally, he calls on the girl that he wishes he was with tonight, a girl that he loved a long time ago and one who he still loves. Claire races to the studio in a taxi as Frank breaks down with tears of gratitude and joy. Sneaking up behind him is Grace's mute son, who whispers something to Frank, who has forgotten to say, "God bless us, everyone." Claire joins Frank on stage and the two finally embrace, with the 3 ghosts celebrating above them. And that's going to wrap up this recap. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single video.